Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we will discuss RNA viruses including orthomyxo, paramyxo and coronaviruses. Three types of influenza viruses are recognized: A, B and C, distinguishable by the nature of their internal proteins. The influenza virus is a spherical or filamentous enveloped virus. Hemagglutinin H, a surface glycoprotein, adds attachment of the virus to the wall of susceptible host cells at specific receptor sites. Cell penetration, probably by pinocytosis, and release of replicated viruses from the cell surface effected by budding through the cell membrane are facilitated by the action of the enzyme neuraminidase, which is also present on the viral envelope. 16H subtypes H1 to H16 and 9N subtypes N1 to N9 have been identified for influenza A viruses, but only H1 to H3 and N1 and N2 have been established as stable lineages in the human population since 1918. Influenza A is generally responsible for pandemics and epidemics. Influenza B often causes smaller or localized and milder outbreaks such as in camps or schools. Influenza C rarely produces disease in humans. Antigenic shift generates new influenza A subtypes which emerge at irregular intervals and give rise to influenza pandemics. Possible mechanisms include genetic reassortment of the RNA of the virus, which is arranged in 8 segments with date of an avian influenza virus. This requires co-infection of a host with both human and avian viruses. Pig is one animal in which this may occur. Alternatively, humans may act as the mixing vessel. Trans-species transmission of an avian influenza virus to human. Viruses transmitted in this way are usually not well adapted to growth in their new host, but adaptation may occur as a result of spontaneous mutations leading to the emergence of a pandemic strain. Antigenic drift, minor changes in influenza A and B viruses result from point mutation leading to amino acid changes in the two surface glycoproteins hemagglutinin and neuraminidase, which induce humoral immunity. This enables the virus to evade previously induced immune responses and is the process whereby annual influenza epidemics arise. Thus, changes due to the antigenic shift or drift render the individual immune response less able to combat the new variant. The most serious pandemic of influenza caused by influenza A H1N1 occurred in 1918 and was associated with more than 20 million deaths worldwide. In 1957, antigenic shift led to the appearance of influenza A H2N2, which caused a worldwide pandemic. A further pandemic occurred in 1968 owing to the emergence of Hong Kong influenza A H3N2, and minor antigenic drifts have caused outbreaks around the world since. In 1997, avian influenza A H5N1 viruses were isolated from humans, raising the spectra of another pandemic. Over 300 sporadic human A H5N1 infections have been reported since, mostly from Southeast Asia and almost always arising from direct contact with infected chickens, with a mortality of more than 50%. However, whilst this virus is highly pathogenic to humans due to the induction of cytokine storm within the lungs, it still has not evolved to replicate well in human cells. Infected individuals do not therefore shed large quantities of virus from the respiratory tract, and human to human spread is unusual. However, anxieties remain that either genetic reassortment will occur in human co-infected with human AH1N1 or AH3N2 viruses, or adaptive mutations will occur within infected human hosts such that a truly pandemic strain will emerge. Purified hemagglutinin and neuraminidase from recently circulating strains of influenza A and B viruses are incorporated in current vaccines. Sporadic cases of influenza and outbreaks among groups of people living in a confined environment are frequent. The incidence increases during the winter months. Spread is mainly by droplet infection, but fomites and direct contact have also been implicated. The clinical features diagnosis. The incubation period of influenza is usually 1 to 3 days. The illness starts abruptly with fever, shivering, and generalized aching in the limbs. This is associated with severe headache, soreness of the throat, and a dry cough that can persist for several weeks. Diarrhea occurs in 70% of cases of H5N1. Influenza infection can be followed by a prolonged period of debility and depression that may take weeks or months to clear. Secondary bacterial infection is common following influenza virus infection, particularly with Streptococcus pneumoniae and Haemophilus influenzae. Secondary pneumonia caused by Staph aureus is rarer but more serious and carries a mortality of up to 20%. Post-infectious encephalomyelitis rarely occurs after influenza infection. Lab diagnosis is usually not necessary, but a definitive diagnosis can be established by demonstrating a four-fold increase in the complement fixing antibody or the hemagglutinin antibody measured at onset and after 1 to 2 weeks, or by demonstrating the virus in throat or nasal secretions. Treatment is by bed rest and paracetamol with antibiotics to prevent secondary infection in those with chronic bronchitis, cardiac or renal disease. Neuraminidase inhibitors may help to shorten the duration of symptoms in patients with influenza. If neuraminidase inhibitors are given within 48 hours of the first symptom. The cost benefit of zanamivir and oseltamivir remain unproven, but these are currently recommended in Britain for patients with suspected influenza over the age of 65 and at risk adults as part of a strategy to reduce admission to hospital when influenza is circulating in the community. Protection by influenza vaccine is only effective in up to 70% of people and only lasts for about a year. Influenza vaccine should not be given to individuals who are allergic to egg protein as some are manufactured in chick embryos. New vaccines have been prepared to cover each change in viral antigenicity and therefore in limited supply at the start of an epidemic. Nevertheless, routine vaccination is recommended for all individuals over 65 years of age and also for younger people with chronic heart disease, chronic lung disease including asthma, chronic kidney disease, diabetes, and those who are immunosuppressed. During pandemics, key hospital and health service personnel should also be vaccinated. Paramyxoviruses. Paramyxoviruses are a heterogeneous group of enveloped viruses with a negative single-stranded RNA genome of varying size that are responsible for a variety of infections. Parainfluenza is caused by parainfluenza virus types 1 to 4. These have a worldwide distribution and cause acute respiratory disease. Type 4 appears to be less virulent than the other types and has been linked only to milder upper respiratory tract disease in children and adults. Parainfluenza is essentially a disease of children and presents with features similar to the common cold. When severe, a brassy cough with inspiratory stridor and features of laryngotracheitis croup are present. Fever is usually present for 2 to 3 days and may be more prolonged if pneumonia develops. The development of croup is due to submucosal edema and consequent airway obstruction in the subglottic region. This may lead to cyanosis, subcostal and intercostal recession, and progressive airway obstruction. Infection in the immunocompromised is usually prolonged and may be severe. Treatment is supportive with oxygen, humidification, and sedation when required. The role of steroids and antiviral agent ribavirin is controversial. Measles is a highly communicable disease that occurs worldwide. With introduction of aggressive immunization policies, the incidence of measles has fallen dramatically in the West, but there are estimated 0.5 million deaths annually due to measles infection worldwide, mostly in Africa and Southeast Asia, with mortality being highest in children less than 12 months of age. Measles is spread by a droplet infection, and the period of infectivity is from 4 days before until 2 days after the onset of rash. The incubation period is 8 to 14 days for measles. Two distinct phases of the disease can be recognized. Typical measles. The eruptive and catarrhal stage is the stage of viremia and viral dissemination. Malaise, fever, cough, conjunctival suffusion, and the pathognomonic complex spots are present during this stage. Complex spots are small, grayish, irregular lesions surrounded by an erythematous base and are found in greatest number on the buccal mucous membrane opposite the second molar tooth. They occur a day or two before the onset of rash. The eruptive or exanthematous stage is characterized by presence of a maculopapular rash that initially occurs on the face, chiefly the forehead, and then spreads rapidly to involve the rest of the body. At first, The rash is discrete, but later it may become confluent and patchy, especially on the face and neck. It fades in about 1 week and leaves behind a brownish discoloration. The most feared complication in an immunocompetent child is acute measles encephalitis, with the incidence of 1 in 1000 to 1 in 5000 cases of measles. This is post infectious, that is, the virus is not present in the brain, and the encephalitis presumably arises through an aberrant cross reaction of the host immune response to infection. Prognosis is poor with high mortality 30% and severe residual damage in survivors. Measles carry a high mortality in malnourished and in those who have other diseases. Complications are common in such individuals and include bacterial pneumonia, bronchitis, otitis media, and gastroenteritis. Less commonly, myocarditis, hepatitis, and encephalomyelitis may occur. In those who are malnourished or those with defective cell mediated immunity, the classic maculopapular rash may not develop and widespread desquamation may occur. Persistence of virus with reactivation pre-puberty result in accumulation of virus in the brain with progressive mental deterioration and a fatal outcome. The virus also causes a rare condition called subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, which may follow measles infection occurring early in life, that is less than 18 months of age. Maternal measles, unlike rubella, does not cause fetal abnormalities. It is, however, associated with spontaneous abortions and premature delivery. Most cases of measles are diagnosed clinically, but if necessary, detection of measles specific immunoglobulin M in blood or oral fluid or genome or antigen detection from nasopharyngeal aspirates or throat swabs can be used to confirm the diagnosis. Treatment is supportive. Antibiotics are indicated only if secondary bacterial infection occurs in measles. A previous attack of measles confers a high degree of immunity, and second attacks are uncommon. Normal human immunoglobulin given within 5 days of exposure effectively aborts an attack of measles. It is indicated for previously unimmunized children below 3 years of age during pregnancy and in those with debilitating disease. Active immunization. Children in UK are immunized with the combined MMR vaccine. In developing countries, measles vaccination is given at 9 months age. Now we will discuss mumps. Mumps is the result of infection with a paramyxovirus. Mumps is spread by droplet infection, by direct contact, or through fomites. Humans are the only known natural hosts. The peak period of infectivity is 2 to 3 days before the onset of parotitis and for 3 days afterwards. The incubation period averages 18 days. Although no age is exempt, it is primarily a disease of school age children and young adults. It is uncommon before the age of 2 years. The prodromal symptoms are non-specific and include fever, malaise, headache, and anorexia. This is usually followed by severe pain over the parotid glands with either unilateral or bilateral parotid swelling. The enlarged parotid glands obscure the angle of mandible and may elevate the earlobe, which does not occur in cervical lymph node enlargement. Trismus due to pain is common at this stage. Submandibular gland involvement occurs less frequently. CNS involvement is the most common extrasalivary gland manifestation of mumps. Clinical meningitis occur in 5% of all infected patients and 30% of patients with CNS involvement have no evidence of parotid gland involvement. Epididymoarchitis develop in about one-third of patients who develop mumps after puberty. Bilateral testicular involvement results in sterility in only a small percentage of these patients. Pancreatitis, oophorytis, myocarditis, mastitis, hepatitis, and polyarthritis may also occur. The diagnosis of mumps is based on clinical features. In doubtful cases, serological demonstration of a mump-specific immunoglobulin M response in an acute blood or oral fluid sample is diagnostic. Virus can be isolated in cell culture from saliva, throat swab, urine, and cerebrospinal fluid, and identified by genome detection or antigen detection by immunofluorescence. Treatment is supportive. Attention should be given to adequate nutrition and mouth care. Analgesics should be given to relieve pain. MMR vaccine is used for prevention of mumps. Vaccination is contraindicated in immunosuppressed individuals during pregnancy or in those who have severe febrile illness. Respiratory syncytial virus is a paramyxovirus that causes many respiratory infections in epidemics each winter. RSV is a common cause of bronchiolitis in infants, which is complicated by pneumonia in approximately 10% of cases. The infection normally starts with upper respiratory symptoms. After an interval of 1 to 3 days, a cough and low-grade fever may develop. The onset of bronchiolitis is characterized by dyspnea and hyperexpansion of the chest with subcostal and intercostal recession. The disease may be severe and potentially fatal in babies with underlying cardiac, respiratory, including prematurity, or immunodeficiency states. RSV infection has been associated with occurrence of sudden infant death syndrome, SID. The virus undergoes antigenic drift and consequently reinfection can occur throughout life. RSV is occasionally the cause of outbreaks of influenza-like illness or pneumonia in the elderly and in the immunocompromised. Transfer of infection between children in hospital commonly occurs unless infected patients are isolated or cohorted. Meticulous attention to hand washing and other infection control measures reduce the risk of transmission by staff members. Genome detection or immunofluorescence on nasopharyngeal aspirates, viral culture, and serology are the usual ways of confirming the diagnosis of respiratory syncytial virus. Treatment of RSV is generally supportive, but aerosolized ribavirin can be given to severe cases, particularly those with underlying cardiac or respiratory disease. No vaccine is currently available for RSV, but high-risk children, including those with bronchopulmonary dysplasia and congenital heart disease, can be protected against severe disease by monthly administration of either a hyperimmune globulin against RSV or a humanized monoclonal antibody palivizumab during the winter months. Now we will discuss human metapneumovirus, which is a recently discovered virus causing approximately 10% of lower respiratory tract infection in infants and young children. Human metapneumovirus infection is clinically indistinguishable from that caused by respiratory syncytial virus. Hendra virus, formerly called equine morbillivirus, and Nipah viruses are zoonotic viruses that have caused disease in humans who have been in contact with infected animals, horses, and pigs respectively. The viruses are named after the locations where they were first isolated: Hendra in Australia and Nipah in Malaysia, and both are classified as paramyxoviruses. Hendra virus has caused severe respiratory distress in horses and humans, and Nipah virus caused a major outbreak of viral encephalitis in Malaysia between September 1998 and April 1999. Treatment of these conditions is largely supportive, although there is some evidence that early treatment with ribavirin may reduce the severity of the disease. Now we come to the discussion of coronaviruses that have played havoc with humanity. Human coronaviruses were first isolated in mid 1960s, and the majority of isolates related to the reference strains 229E and OC43 have been associated with common colds. In November 2002, an apparently new viral disease occurred in China, Guangdong province, and this spread rapidly in other parts of the Far East and also in the Canada, Toronto and Vancouver. This disease, known as severe acute respiratory syndrome SARS, of which bronchopneumonia has been a major feature, is caused by previously unknown coronavirus, SARS-CoV. Similarity of this virus to coronavirus is isolated from civet cats, raccoons, and ferret badgers indicate the likelihood that SARS is a zoonotic disease. Bats are the likely host species for this virus. The epidemic was finally brought under control in summer of 2003, and then there had been more than 8,000 cases with approximately 800 deaths. In 2004 and 5, two new coronavirus infections of humans were described: NL63 and HKU1. These are associated with upper respiratory tract symptomatology such as common cold. Coronaviruses are the members of nidovirus family, viruses that replicate using a nested set of messenger RNA, nido for nest. The human coronaviruses are classified into two genera: alpha coronavirus HCOV229E and HCOV NL63, and beta coronaviruses HCOV HKU1, HCOV OC43, and SARS coronavirus. Toroviruses are the only other nidoviruses known to cause disease in humans. They have similar genome organization compared with coronaviruses, however, they have different genome lengths and virion morphology. Toroviruses have been associated only with diarrhea in humans and animals. The incubation period for COVID-19 is thought to extend to 14 days, with a median time of 4 to 5 days from exposure to symptom onset. One study reported that 97.5% of people with COVID-19 who have symptoms will do so within 11.5 days of SARS-CoV-2 infection. The signs and symptoms of COVID-19 present at illness onset varily, but over the course of disease, many people with COVID-19 will experience the following symptoms: fever or chills, cough, shortness of breath or difficulty in breathing, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headache, new loss of taste or smell, sore throat, congestion or runny nose, nausea or vomiting, and diarrhea. Symptoms may differ with severity of disease. For example, shortness of breath is more commonly reported among people who are hospitalized with COVID-19 than those with milder disease who are non-hospitalized. Atypical presentation of COVID-19 often occur, and older adults and people with medical comorbidities may experience fever and respiratory symptoms later during the course of illness than people who are younger or who do not have comorbidities. In one study of 1,099 hospitalized patients, fever was present in only 44% at hospital admission, but eventually 89% of patients had a fever, sometimes during hospitalization. Fatigue, headache, and muscle pain are among the most commonly reported symptoms in people who are not hospitalized, and sore throat and nasal congestion or runny nose, rhinorrhea also may be prominent symptoms. Many people with COVID 19 experience gastrointestinal symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, or diarrhea, sometimes prior to having fever, and lower respiratory tract signs and symptoms. Loss of smell, anosmia, or taste, ageusia, have been commonly reported in a third of patients in one study, especially among women and younger or middle aged patients. Dermatological manifestation may be associated with COVID 19, although the frequency remains unknown. Reports have ranged from 0.2% early in the pandemic to as high as 20%. Association with disease severity and timing of skin symptoms among COVID 19 patients is unclear. The clinical presentation appears varied, though in a study of 171 persons with lab confirmed COVID 19, ranging from mild to severe disease, the most common skin manifestations were a maculopapular rash 22%, discolored lesions of the fingers and toes 18%, and hives 16%. Among all study participants with COVID 19 and any skin manifestation, 60% reported fever and or cough. Evaluating skin manifestation in COVID 19 remains challenging as symptoms can resemble a variety of other disease conditions. Additionally, COVID 19 treatments may also cause certain skin side effects. Several studies have documented infection with SARS CoV 19, the virus causing this disease, in patients who have never had symptoms, asymptomatic, and patients not yet symptomatic, pre-symptomatic. Since people who are asymptomatic are not always tested, the prevalence of asymptomatic infection and detection of pre-symptomatic infection is not yet well understood. Current data based on reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction (RT-PCR) testing for SARS-CoV-19 on serological studies suggest asymptomatic infection can be common and that the total number of infections is likely greater than number of cases reported. Patients may have abnormalities on chest imaging before the onset of symptoms. Increasing number of epidemiological studies have documented SARS-CoV-2 transmission during the pre-symptomatic incubation period. Studies with increasing number of tests by RT-PCR have reported low cycle threshold indicating larger quantities of viral RNA among people with asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic COVID-19 infection. Likewise, in viral culture, viral growth has been observed in specimens obtained from patients with asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic infection. The proportion of COVID-19 transmission due to asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic infection compared with symptomatic infection is not entirely clear. However, recent studies do suggest that people who are not showing symptoms may transmit the virus. A large cohort that included more than 40,000 patients with COVID 19 from China showed that illness severity can range from mild to critical. Mild to moderate with mild symptoms up to mild pneumonia in 81%, severe symptoms dyspnea, hypoxia or more than 50%, lung involvement on imaging in 14%, critical respiratory failure, shock or multi-organ system dysfunction in 5% patients. Among patients in multiple early studies from Wuhan, China, who had severe COVID-19 illness, the median time from their onset of illness to the time they experienced dyspnea was 5 to 8 days. The median time from onset of illness to acute respiratory distress syndrome was 8 to 12 days, and the median time from onset of illness to ICU admission was 9.5 to 12 days. Clinicians should be aware of the potential for some patients with COVID 19 to rapidly deteriorate about 1 week after illness onset. Among all hospitalized patients, 26 to 32% patients were admitted to the ICU. Among all patients, 3 to 17% had ARDS compared with 20 to 42% for hospitalized patients and 85% for patients admitted to the ICU. Mortality among patients admitted to the ICU ranged from 39 to 72% depending on the study and characteristics of the patient population. The median length of hospitalization among survivors was 10 to 13 days. Risk factors for severe illness. Age is a strong factor for severe illness, complications, and death. Among the cohort of more than 44,000 confirmed cases of COVID 19 in China, the CFR increased with advancing age and was highest among the oldest cohort. Mortality among people 80 years and older was 14%, 70 to 79 8%, 60 to 69 3%, 50 to 59 1.3%, 40 to 49 years 0.4%, and for those younger than 40 years 0.2%. Based on US data through March 2020, CFR was highest in people aged 85 years or older 27%, followed by people 65 to 84 years of age 3 to 11%, 54 to 64 years 1 to 3%, and lower in people younger than 55 years, that was less than 1% for less than 55 years age group. CFR in large cohort in China was elevated in patients with comorbidities, with 10.5% for those with underlying cardiovascular disease, 7% for diabetes, 6% for chronic respiratory disease, 5% for cancer, dying of COVID related illness. Prior stroke, diabetes, chronic lung disease, and chronic kidney disease have all been associated with increased illness severity and adverse outcomes due to COVID 19. Heart conditions including heart failure, coronary artery disease, cardiomyopathies, and pulmonary hypertension put people at higher risk for severe illness from COVID 19. People with hypertension may be at increased risk for severe illness from COVID 19 and should continue to take their medications as prescribed. To date, limited data exists about reinfection with COVID 19 after recovery, but published case reports have shown that reinfection is possible, but it is still unclear how long people who have recovered from COVID 19 are protected against reinfection, what concentration of antibodies is needed to confer protection, and how often reinfection may occur. COVID 19 has been correlated with detection of IgM and IgG antibodies to SARS-CoV-2. COVID 19 has been correlated with detection of these antibodies. The risk of reinfection may be increased in future with exposure to SARS-CoV-2 variant virus strains that are not neutralized by immune antisera, such as one recently described in the South African region. Prolonged shedding of the virus. While viral RNA shedding declines with resolution of symptoms, shedding may continue to be occurring for days to weeks. Thus, detection of viral RNA during convalescence does not necessarily indicate replication competent virus, that is infectiousness, or presence of new infectious virus. Some people who have recovered may have detectable RNA in their upper respiratory specimen for up to 3 months after illness onset, albeit at concentrations considerably lower than during illness. In ranges where replication competent virus has not been reliably recovered and infectiousness is unlikely. Some people with severe illness might produce replication competent virus beyond 10 days but may warrant extending duration of isolation and precautions for up to 20 days after symptom onset. Limited data suggests that some severely immunocompromised patients, that is, patients with lymphoma, hemoglobinuria, and hematopoietic stem cell transplant recipients, AIDS patients, and those receiving immunosuppression with chemotherapy, systemic corticosteroids, and biologics might produce replication competent virus beyond 20 days and require additional testing and consultation with infectious disease specialists. Diagnosis of COVID 19 requires detection of RNA or antigen in the respiratory specimens. Detection of SARS-CoV-2 viral RNA is better in nasopharynx samples compared with throat samples. Lower respiratory samples may have better viral yield than upper respiratory samples. Antigen tests can also be used in a variety of testing strategies. Viral RNA has also been detected in stool and blood. Detection of RNA in blood may be a marker of severe illness. Infection with COVID-19 and with other respiratory viruses, for example influenza or bacteria, is well documented, and detection of another respiratory pathogen does not rule out COVID-19. Clinicians are encouraged to consider testing for other viral causes of respiratory illness, for example influenza, in addition to testing for COVID-19, depending upon the patient age, season, or clinical setting. Clinicians should also consider bacterial and fungal causes of pneumonia, for example Legionnaires disease in patients exposed to water from previously closed building or overnight travel, pneumococcal pneumonia, and coccidioidomycosis in patients who are PCR negative for COVID-19 as clinically indicated. Lymphopenia is the most common laboratory findings among patients with COVID-19 and is found in 83% hospitalized patients. Lymphopenia, neutrophilia, elevated serum alanine aminotransferase and aspartate aminotransferase levels, elevated lactate dehydrogenase, high CRP, and high ferritin level may be associated with greater illness severity. Elevated D-dimer and lymphopenia have been associated with mortality. Procalcitonin is typically normal on admission but may increase among those patients who are admitted to ICU. Patients with critical illness had high plasma levels of inflammatory markers suggesting potential immune dysregulation. Chest radiograph of patients with COVID-19 typically demonstrate bilateral airspace consolidation, although some patients have unremarkable chest radiographs early in the disease. Chest computerized tomography images from patients with COVID-19 typically demonstrate bilateral peripheral ground glass opacities. Because this chest CT imaging pattern is non-specific and can be found in pneumonias caused by other infections, the diagnostic value of chest CT for COVID-19 may be low and dependent upon radiographic interpretation. One study found that 56% patients who presented within 2 days of diagnosis had a normal CT chest. Conversely, other studies have identified chest CT abnormalities in patients prior to the detection of viral RNA in PCR done for nasopharyngeal samples. Given the variability in chest imaging findings, chest radiograph or CT alone is not recommended for diagnosis of COVID-19 by the American College of Radiology. How to manage the patients? Mild to moderate disease, patients with mild clinical presentation, absence of viral pneumonia and hypoxia may not require hospitalization, and most patients will be able to manage their illness at home. The decision to monitor a patient in an inpatient or outpatient setting should be made on case-by-case basis. This decision will depend upon the clinical presentation, requirement for supportive care, potential risk factors for severe disease, and the ability of the patient to self-isolate. Patients with risk factor for severe illness should be monitored closely given the possible risk of progression to severe illness, especially in the second week of symptom onset. In certain clinical settings, pulse oximetry is used to assess and monitor a patient oxygenation. Clinicians should be aware that pulse oximeters may exhibit suboptimal accuracy in certain populations. Limited data from studies with small number of participants suggest that skin pigmentation can affect pulse oximetry accuracy. Some patients with COVID-19 will have severe disease requiring hospitalization. Inpatient management includes supportive management of the most complications like pneumonia, hypoxemic respiratory failure, sepsis and septic shock, cardiomyopathy and arrhythmia, acute kidney injury, and complications from prolonged hospitalization, including secondary bacterial and fungal infections, thromboembolism, gastrointestinal bleeding, and critical illness, polyneuropathy or myopathy. Some patients with COVID-19 may have signs of hypercoagulable state and be at increased risk for venous and arterial thrombosis of large and small vessels. Lab abnormalities commonly observed among hospitalized patients with COVID-19 associated coagulopathy include mild thrombocytopenia, increased D-dimers levels, increased fibrin degradation products, prolonged prothrombin time. Elevated D-dimers are strongly associated with greater risk of death. There can be microvascular thrombosis of the toes called COVID toes, clotting of intravascular catheters, myocardial injury with ST segment elevation, large vessel strokes. The pathogenesis of COVID-19 associated hypercoagulability is incompletely understood. However, hypoxia and systemic inflammation secondary to COVID-19 may lead to the high levels of inflammatory cytokines and activation of the coagulation pathway. Data available from clinical management around prophylaxis or treatment of venous thromboembolism in COVID-19 patients is still evolving with new information released often. Several associations provide resources for up-to-date information for COVID-19 hypercoagulability, including management of anticoagulation. Pediatric considerations. Increasingly, data indicate that clinical symptoms experienced by children with COVID-19 are similar to adults, but disease is usually milder than adults, and severity of symptoms varies by age of the child. Many children infected with COVID-19 remain asymptomatic or have mild illness. Commonly reported symptoms in children with COVID-19 include cough or fever, and many children have gastrointestinal or other symptoms. Even though most children with COVID-19 have asymptomatic or mild disease, severe outcomes including death have been reported in some children. Children of all ages with certain underlying conditions may be at increased risk of severe illness, and infants less than 12 months of age may be at increased risk of severe illness from COVID-19. Patients with multisystem inflammatory syndrome usually present with persistent fever, abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea, skin rash, mucocutaneous lesions, and in severe cases, hypotension and shock. Affected children have elevated lab markers of inflammation like CRP and ferritin, and a majority of patients have lab markers of damage to the heart, that is, troponin is elevated with BNP and pro-BNP elevation. Some patients have myocarditis, cardiac dysfunction, and acute kidney injury. Not all children with multisystem inflammatory syndrome experience the same signs and symptoms, and some children may have symptoms not discussed here. This condition may begin weeks after a child was infected with COVID-19. The child may have been infected from an asymptomatic contact, and in some cases, the child and their caregivers might not realize that child has been infected. There are some anecdotal success stories with metformin, ivermectin, famotidine, ketotifen, low-dose inhaled steroids. For disinfection, regarding general use, 60 ml bleach with 500 ml water can be used in an opaque container for 4 days for hand disinfection and disinfection of surfaces in an open space while using in the sprayer, while spirit in spray form can be used for disinfection if metal or colored cloths or currency are to be disinfected. These are the two cheap and readily available and effective disinfectants for general use. Thank you very much. That's it.